the proclamation of the legislative results, the president of the Democratic Party, Eric Kundate, disagreed with the results. Former President of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, led mediation in the African Union peace process with Tigray, and it's yielding results. The World Health Organization is expected to declare the Ugandan recent Ebola outbreak over. Good afternoon, our dear viewers. Welcome to today's edition of the news, coming to you live and direct from Golfe TV Africa here in the city of Cotonou with Hazel OGOIGBE. Now, let's get started with the news on the local scene. Now, the main opposition Democrats won 28 seats, while the Republican Bloc and the Progressive Union for Renewal, UPR parties, allied with President Patrice Talon together, and they won 81 seats in Sunday's legislative elections. Now, the Senate, the Electoral Authority, stated this. And the final results are expected on Friday because it was a tentative result that came out after a vote that went ahead peacefully in line with the regulations according to election observers. After the proclamation of the results, the president of the Democratic Party, President Eric Kundate, had this to say. More information in the following extract.
Militantes et militants du Parti démocrate, sympathisants et amis du Parti des démocrates, Parti du peuple. Chers compatriotes, après 3 jours d'attente, la Sénat a proclamé ce jour, mercredi 11 janvier 2023, les résultats provisoires des élections législatives du dimanche 8 janvier 2023. Avant toute chose, c'est au peuple béninois que notre parti, le Parti des démocrates, voudrait adresser ses premiers mots. D'abord, pour le féliciter de sa constante bravoure, de sa maturité politique,
Members of the Democratic Party, friends of the Democratic Party, the People's Party, their compatriots. After 3 days of waiting, the National Autonomous Electoral Commission Sinai proclaimed on Wednesday, the 11th of January 2023, provisional results of the legislative elections that took place on Sunday, the 8th of January 2023. Before everything, our party, the Democratic Party, would love to address firstly, to congratulate the Beninese people for their political maturity, for their patriotism towards their country, and their quest for peace, which led to the elections taking place in a peaceful and violent-free environment. Despite the intimidation, the menace and the provocation faced by some of the Beninese citizens. Furthermore, I thank the people for their confidence they had in us, which was demonstrated in their massive vote they accorded us, confirming that we are the only and true political party of the people, the party whose objective corresponds with their aspiration. In proclaiming the provisional results on Wednesday, the National Autonomous Electoral Commission Sinai has announced that our party, the Democrats, won 24 legislative seats, which is surprising, and naturally we do not agree with this announcement. The Democratic Party rejects this verdict, which does not reflect the will of the people who have made our party a resounding political force in our country. In effect, the occasion was presented during the electoral campaign to observe that our party, the Democratic Party, was the alternative desired by the citizens of Benin Republic. The Beninese desired that we gain majority of the seats at the national level. This wish was hijacked. It is therefore natural that the Democratic Party shows that we do not agree with the proposal we announced on Wednesday, the 11th of January 2023. Away from that, still on the local scene, having a recap of the events that occurred on Sunday, some political personalities shared their thoughts on the just concluded legislative elections. Now, they also went out to exercise their civic duties, and for the commune of Parakou, it was a day characterized with peace and tranquility.
We have also come to accomplish our civic duty. For that reason, we have to say that it's a great day. We are thanking the Almighty God who has helped us to go about all this where we went about accomplishing our duties. I pray that everyone comes out to accomplish their civic duty and return without any provocation. And those who want to surprise or follow should do it with total responsibility. It is my hope that it continues in peace, because I went round and I noticed the discipline level of everybody. Everybody voted as they ought to and left the scene as expected of them. So, I pray that it continues like this till the end, especially at the stage of ballot paper counting, with a full responsibility and wisdom for each and every one of us within this school.
First of all, I thank the people of Benin. I thank the people of the 8th constituency, and particularly the people of Parakou. The vote is of crucial importance to the 8th constituency. For the commune of Parakou, the truth will override lies. By the grace of God, light will shine over the darkness, because this vote is important. Either the 8th constituency advances or draws back, because the 8th constituency is enclaved, disinherited. It is the last or the second to last constituency on the national territory. I take profit of the occasion to ask of the population of Parakou, the 8th constituency, to vote in serenity, in calmness, in order, in discipline, for God to answer our prayers. Well, it is going to be David against Goliath. God who gave the victory to David against Goliath, that God exists today and forever. So once again, that this day be seen as a festive one. No fights, no violence.
Allégresse, pas de tapage, pas de bruit, pas la violence.
Depuis la matinée, tout se passe dans le calme.
Since morning, also passing calm, mutual respect. My wish is that the momentum continues until the end of the voting activities, that the best person wins. A call for calm, a call for respect for others, a call for respect for difference, and once again for the future of our country. We're a country of peace, and we're all going to do everything for the peace of Parakou to be reinforced.
Away from that, of course, still on the local scene, now still in the joy of the new year, the ambience in Tokwa Market on Monday was characterized with joy, dancing, laughter, and rejoicing. Now, at the beginning of the year, a pastor normally comes to pray with the women, encouraging them to put away the strife and rift of the previous year and salute one another in love in the spirit of the new year. More information in the following commentary. In the Dan Tokwa Market, or simply the Tokwa Market as it is fondly called, the atmosphere on Monday, the 9th of January 2023 was filled with so much joy. The market women were still in the spirit of the new year. At the beginning of the year in Tokwa Market, a pastor comes to pray with the market women. This occasion is characterized by singing and dancing to Christian songs. This was the order of the day on Monday, the 9th of January 2023. One of the exhortations given by the pastor to the market women was to greet one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Christian belief is to forgive and forget wrongs meted out by your neighbor. He also admonished them to congratulate and rejoice with one another. Generally, the beginning of the year prayer is held in Tokwa Market, and it is seen as a period to salute everyone, including those you kept a grudge with the previous year, and let bygones be bygones. Watching the women rejoice was such a beautiful sight to behold. They do not have everything they desire, but they portray the spirit of love and sisterhood. Created their happiness, and I'm thankful for the little they had. Danced, rejoiced, and hugged one another. The Dantopo market is the largest open-air market in Western Africa, located in Cotonou, Benin Republic. It is one of the most important retailing areas in Benin, covering over 20 hectares of land. It is also an economic stronghold in Benin Republic, with a reported commercial turnover of over 1 billion CFA francs per day. Still on the local scene, still a recap of what happened on Sunday, the just concluded legislative elections. Now, a day after the Beninese went out to vote for their respective candidates, that was on Monday, the president of the Democratic Party, Henry Kudete, aired his profound gratitude to all Beninese who went out to accomplish their civic duty peacefully.
Depuis que
Since we had our definitive authorization to participate in the legislative election of January 8, 2023, something changed in the country. Hope was given birth to, and a kind of assurance was seen at the level of the population. A big expectation of change was expressed. I want to express my profound gratitude to all Beninese who, in peace and past 8 January, came out to accomplish their civic duty. Through this act, the ruling government learned a lesson that it is not useful to continue with exclusion, and that exclusion always brings about reactions, which can be bad for the country. I want to thank our people for its engagement, its determination to change things. I want to thank them for having participated in a peaceful election. I appreciate all our comrades who abstained from reacting to different provocations, all our comrades who were able to manage different acts that could have led to social disturbances, which could have degenerated into violence. I thank them and all the public security forces who were able to control certain situations. I want to note that the hope that was given birth to through the act of our participation in this election, which we are expecting to be of a neat manifestation in the quantitative participation in this vote, did not completely meet our expectation, and we understood that the hesitancy to participate in the vote casting reveals a certain form of lack of confidence in this regime, whom many citizens believe that irrespective of what they do, the vote will be stolen. They have lost hope. Our compatriots have lost hope for returning to the ballot box. The reconciliation with ballot boxes, the correction of the divorce with the ballot boxes that we have noticed wasn't total. We hope that any moment from now, Beninese will fully and totally return to the ballot boxes.
D'ici à là, les Béninois retourneront entièrement, complètement aux urnes.
Away from that, let's cross over to Ethiopia. Now, after former President of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, led mediation in the African Union peace process, the Tigrayan forces who fought a 2-year war against Ethiopia's federal government have begun the handing over of their heavy weaponry to the National Army on Tuesday. More information in the following report. After former President Olusegun Obasanjo led mediation in the African Union peace process, the Tigray forces who fought a 2-year war against Ethiopia's federal government have begun the handing over of their heavy weaponry to the National Army on Tuesday, the 10th of January 2020.
The first sign for me of the progress after the signing of the agreement is the fact that between them they have exchanged hotline by which they can call themselves if anything is happening.
Tigray Defense Forces, colloquially Tigray Army, is a paramilitary rebel group in Tigray. It was founded by distant former generals of Ethiopia on the 4th of November 2020, aimed in fighting the government's mandate and federal forces. According to Reuters, the demobilization of Tigray forces is seen as central to the November 2nd ceasefire agreement, resumption of humanitarian aid, and withdrawal of Eritrean troops who fought alongside Ethiopia's army but were not a party to the conflict. Created famine-like conditions for hundreds of thousands of Tigray's population, killed thousands and displaced millions across northern Ethiopia. The handover in the town of Agulwe, around 30 kilometers northeast of the regional capital Mekelle, was overseen by a monitoring team comprising members of the two sides and a regional body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. As the ceremony, Tigrayan Defense Forces representatives Mulugeta said the start of the disarmament would play a major role in restoring peace.
And the more services there are, the more confidence there is, the more communication there is, and the more hope and expectation it instills in the people's mind, and that will further consolidate the peace we are trying to put in place.
Eritrean soldiers pulled out of several major towns in Tigray late last month, but have not left Tigrayan territory, according to residents. Eritrea has declined to comment on whether troops will leave or not. Away from that, in Kenya, small business owners are feeling upbeat following China's decision to ease its COVID-19 travel rules. Now, they say the move by the world's second largest economy will once again stimulate global economic growth. More information in this following report.
With China opening borders to international travel, many importers here in Kenya are optimistic that soon things will get back to normalcy.
Small business owners in the capital Nairobi say China's travel restrictions due to the coronavirus pandemic had put a dampener on trade.
We are facing some challenges in the prices. Also the transportation, the containers, almost doubled price. The other thing is we could not travel to China to go and find more supplies or more varieties of things. We only could deal with those that we had previously.
So the sales were too low. Due to that, it affected prices of the commodities. You see, like prices for the tires went up by almost 50%.
Beginning on January 8th, China will remove its quarantine regulations for incoming travelers. Fahim is confident that this will help open the supply chain.
We have plans to go for the country fair, which I think will communicate the dates. So we are very happy that they've opened.
Lockdowns in China have disrupted global supply lines, delaying the production of everything from cars to phones. John Muley, who has been importing car tires from China for the past 10 years, thinks the move by China is good for small business owners in Africa.
The business will change, so there will be a lot of changes. Because many people will be importing products from China, so the costs and the sales will be a bit high. You see, when you import from China, so the importation cost and the transportation cost from China is a bit lower.
Fahim and Muley look forward to once again traveling to China, conducting their business and living with ease.
Still on matters relating to China, international flights have resumed in China after restrictions lifted quarantine requirements for inbound travelers from abroad. Now, this is ending the almost 3 years of pandemic-related entry restrictions, and people were seen hugging and embracing at the airport across the country, with family members reuniting with loved ones sometime after the years apart.
Finally, back home. A big hug between a father and his daughter after 3 years. Shanghai's first international flight arrived at Pudong International Airport at 6:30 a.m. on Sunday, arriving from Auckland by New Zealand Airline. Mr. Li, a father of an overseas student, came all the way from neighboring Jiangsu province to pick up his daughter. He also prepared a handwriting banner saying, Welcome home, Mingyu.
I came here yesterday. I haven't seen my daughter for 3 years. I'm very excited. The family misses her very much.
The arrivals hall was overwhelmed by the happiness of family reunion.
I'm very happy. As soon as I saw the news that the quarantine was cancelled on the 8th, I was so happy that I didn't fall asleep for several days. Everything is smooth, just like what it was 3 years ago.
Starting from January 8th, PCR tests and a week of centralized quarantine are no longer required for inbound travelers after arrival. But they will still need to be tested for COVID 48 hours before departure. Following the downgrading of COVID-19 management from Class A to Class B, many international flights have been resumed across China. Driving by the ease of COVID restrictions, together with the upcoming Spring Festival, the passenger flow and flight volumes could see a 40% surge in this month in Shanghai's Pudong and Hongqiao airports. At Shenzhen Bao'an International Airport, the optimized COVID response measures have made cross-border trips faster and more convenient.
We used to conduct COVID tests for passengers and disinfect the plane after arrival. It usually took about half an hour to an hour. But the procedure is much easier now. It just takes 5 to 10 minutes to complete the entry procedure.
Meanwhile, in northwestern Xinjiang region and southwestern Ruili City, China Customs has promoted the orderly and steady resumption of freight services. And in Hong Kong, thousands of travelers heading to the mainland are no longer required to go through quarantines for the first time in 3 years. As the barriers of cross-border travel being removed, many people said 3 years of separation was definitely a thing of the past.
Back to the African scene, the World Health Organization is expected to declare the Uganda recent Ebola outbreak over, and this was supposed to occur on the 11th of January if no new cases were reported. Now, according to WHO guidelines, an outbreak is declared over if there are no new infections within 42 days. Uganda has recorded 142 cases, including 56 deaths, since the Ebola outbreak was announced in September. The World Health Organization is expected to declare the Uganda recent Ebola outbreak over on the 11th of January if no new cases are reported. According to the World Health Organization guidelines, an outbreak is declared over if there are no new infections within 32 days. Uganda has recorded 142 cases, including 56 deaths since the Ebola outbreak was announced in September. The Sudan strain of the virus, unlike the Zaire strain that has caused outbreaks in neighboring Congo in recent years, has no proven vaccine, but trials are to get underway in coming days for a potential vaccine. The 2022 Ugandan outbreak, the first in a decade of less common Sudan strain, is a chance for clinical trials of the 3 vaccines donated by the US-based Sabin Vaccine Institute, University of Oxford, and Merck. Ebola, which can sometimes manifest as a hemorrhagic fever, spreads through contact with the bodily fluids of an infected person or contaminated materials. The World Health Organization has said the fatality rate of the current outbreak is about 40%. On the foreign scene, thousands of supporters of far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, who refuses to accept election results, were arrested in Brazil after destroying the buildings that house the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the new president's residence. More information in the following report from our partners.
During Brazil's first day of the year, a crowd in the streets of Brasilia came out to see Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva inaugurated as the country's new president. 1 week later, crowds witnessed a different scene on the same street, an attempted coup. An estimated 4,000 supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro invaded the Congress building, the Supreme Court, and Planalto Palace, the president's official workplace. The few police officers who were supposed to provide security were chased away. Rioters smashed windows, overturned furniture, and broke into historic buildings. The anti-Lula demonstrators filmed the destruction as it unfolded while attacking the president's residence, invading the Senate, breaking works of art, and setting fire to the Chamber of Deputies. The main entrance of Brazil's Supreme Court building was destroyed. Hundreds of rioters were arrested, but only after President Lula signed a decree for federal forces to intervene. Video posted on social media show police officers walking and driving around the line of demonstrators towards the attack site. Here, police appeared to be standing by after a large crowd of rioters entered the buildings. President Lula, who was not in Brasilia at the time, set up a crisis committee and said he will investigate and arrest those involved.
They are fascists representing everything abominable. They are true vandals who destroyed everything they found in front of them. All the people who did this will be found and punished. Democracy guarantees the right to freedom, but it also demands that people respect the institutions.
Bolsonaro, who has been in the U.S. state of Florida since he left power, distanced himself from the attacks on social media. He wrote, "Peaceful demonstrations, as allowed by law, are part of democracy. However, attacks on and invasions of public buildings as occurred today, as well as those practiced by the left in 2013 and 2017, defy the rule of law." Bolsonaro said the government has linked him to the riots without evidence. Commentators say the former president could come under investigation.
Jair Messias Bolsonaro is one of those responsible for this attack. He is seen as an intellectual mentor because dozens of times he suggested this type of action during his tenure, not to mention the silence, not admitting defeat after the elections. It fueled in its supporters a feeling that the coup was possible.
National police forces and the Brazilian army have assumed command of Brasilia's security until the end of the month. The Brazilian Congress, which was in recess, called an emergency meeting on Monday.
Back to the African scene. Thousands of people turned out in the Gambian capital on Tuesday for the official funeral of a pro-democracy activist who died in custody in 2016 following a protest against former dictator Yahya Jammeh. Now, the mourners lined the streets of Banjul as police passed by carrying the flag-draped coffin of Solo Sadeng in a ceremony that revived memories of Jammeh's brutal rule. Thousands of people turned out in Gambian capital on Tuesday for the official funeral of a pro-democracy activist who died in custody in 2016 following a protest against the former dictator Yahya Jammeh. Mourners lined the streets of Banjul as police passed by carrying the flag-draped coffin of Solo Sadeng in a ceremony that had revived memories of Jammeh's brutal rule. The dictator held sway over the tiny West African state for 22 years until he was defeated in presidential elections in December 2016 by political newcomer Adama Barrow and fled to Equatorial Guinea.
Are you happy that after 7 years we're here respecting the legacy of Solo Sadeng without the electoral reforms he died for? Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy? No, no. Are you happy that Solo Sadeng and his colleagues, their sacrifices is actually seen as any other ordinary because there is no respect for human rights as much as there should be?
Sadeng died in custody in April 2016 at the age of 57 after organizing a protest calling for the return of democracy. His death was a catalyst for uniting the country's fractured opposition and driving away for pro-democracy protests, which ultimately led to Jammeh's fall.
Solo was a catalyst to our newfound democracy. He inspired the masses to expressly desire and vote for change and freedom. Solo's legacy has inspired us in our current security sector reforms and the transitional justice process as a whole.
The president is the biggest betrayer, is the first betrayer of the cause that Solo stood up for. So it is good that he did not even come here to pollute the sanctity, the dignity of Solo.
Justice Minister Dada Jallow paid tribute to Sadeng, describing him as a man who paid the ultimate price in fighting for the cause he genuinely believed in. Away from that, the Church of England on Tuesday apologized for past links to slavery by a related financial body now engaged in a wide-ranging process to compensate victimized communities. Now, the report released on Tuesday follows revelations in June 2022 that the church commissioners endowed had historical ties to the transatlantic slave trade. Now, the Church Commissioners of England was established in 1948, in part with a donation from a fund dating back to Queen Anne in 1704, intending to help the poorest clergy. More information in the following commentary. The Church of England on Tuesday apologized for past links to slavery by a related financial body now engaged in wide-ranging process to compensate African victimized communities. I am deeply sorry, responded Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. He is the spiritual leader of the Anglican Church. This time, the time has come to take action in response to this shameful past. The report was released on Tuesday, and it follows revelation in June 2022 that the Church Commissioners' Endowment had historical ties to the transatlantic slave trade. The Church Commissioners of England was established in 1948, in part with a donation from a fund dating back to Queen Anne in 1704, intended to help the poorest clergy. The report reveals that this fund had invested significant amounts in the South Sea Company, which traded in African slaves. It also received donations from people involved in the slave trade and plantation economy. The Church Commissioners are deeply sorry for their predecessors' ties to the transatlantic slave trade, the organization said in a statement. The organization has pledged a fund of £100 million over the next 9 years for a better and fairer future for all. This money will go in particular to communities that have been affected by slavery. Part of the funds will be used to further research the links between the church and slavery. The Church Commissioners' Deputy Chairman Bishop David Walker of Manchester said the organization now hopes to create a lasting positive legacy that will serve communities affected by slavery. The Church Commissioners manage a €10.1 billion investment fund to support church and clergy activities. The Church of England has previously apologized for its past ties to slavery as Britain faces the legacy of its colonial past. In 2020, the Church called it a disgrace that some of its members had actively profited from slavery. Crossing over to Iran, Iran stated on Monday that it had sentenced 3 more people to death over charges of allegedly killing security forces during protests which have gripped the country for some 4 months. Now, the Islamic Republic has condemned 17 people to death since nationwide protests broke out in September last year after the death of a 22-year-old Gina Mahsa Amani while in moral police custody.
It's the nights Iranians are most afraid of these days, because that's when the Islamic Republic carries out executions in prisons like this one in Karaj. People are gathering here to show their support for the inmates. Among the crowd, the parents of one of the prisoners, Mohammed Robatlu. The 22-year-old has been sentenced to death and transferred to solitary confinement, along with 18-year-old Mohammed Bourani, for allegedly killing a member of the Islamic Republic's armed forces. Robatlu's mother says the trial was a sham and that her son had nothing to do with the incident.
Everybody knows that. They deliberately put this in my son's prosecution file with the aim of hanging my son. That's not right. They're committing an injustice.
Experts agree, quoting official documents from the case leaked in October.
One of these 2 men that you just mentioned, Mohammed Robatlu, his court documents were leaked in October, and even there, just 1 week after he was arrested, you could see that the regime said, we need to execute him and we need to expedite this whole process so that he can be executed. And that was before any court proceedings, before anything even happened. So we can see that these executions are just purely to intimidate people and to stop the protests.
Instead, they're driving people onto the streets. Also here in Berlin, where activists gathered in front of the German Foreign Ministry. They feel the government is not doing enough to pressure the Iranian regime. An assessment shared by members of parliament as well.
I think
one very important thing is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they are responsible for the death and torture of the people that are protesting in Iran, and they must be held accountable. And Germany can not wait for other member states, but has to act on that. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps must be listed on the EU terror list immediately.
Human rights groups believe this could affect the Islamic Republic.
International reactions, pressure can still save Mohammad Gobadlou and Mohammad Rouhani's lives. But again, we know also that Iranian authorities need to implement these death penalties to spread fear in the society, because they haven't managed to control the protests. Now, about 4 months, they're still continuing.
For the time being, mass protests appear to have slowed down in Iran, but anger is still mounting. In Karaj, protesters stood their ground despite gunshots being fired. And they vowed to be back, chanting, "Until the mullahs are gone, our homeland won't be free."
Back to the African scene. 46 Ivorian soldiers were pardoned by Mali's leader and they returned home last week Saturday night. Now, after their plane landed at 11:40 p.m., the uniformed soldiers disembarked one by one, each brandishing a small Ivorian flag. Now, they were greeted by President Alassane Ouattara before entering the presidential pavilion at the airport where their family members were waiting for them. The 46 Ivorian soldiers pardoned by Mali's leader returned home on Saturday night. After the plane landed at 11:40 p.m. GMT, the uniformed soldiers disembarked one by one, each brandishing a small Ivorian flag. They were greeted by President Alassane Ouattara before entering the presidential pavilion at the airport where their families were waiting for them. With the pardon and the return of the troops, tensions between the neighboring countries are calming down as President Ouattara wishes to move on from the diplomatic spat.
I would like to express on behalf of the entire group our deepest gratitude for all that has been undertaken for our return home. I am delighted to see you back on Ivorian soil today. We're happy for you, happy for us, happy for your families, and happy for our nation. Obviously, now that this crisis is behind us, we can resume normal relations with the brother country of Mali, which needs us and which we also need. The Malians are our brothers.
The soldiers had previously been detained in Mali since July 2022 and sentenced to 20 years in prison for conspiracy against the government until they were pardoned. Mali had accused them of being mercenaries, while Ivory Coast and the United Nations say they were flown in to provide routine backup security for the German contingent of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali. In related stories, after Mali's leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, pardoned all the 49 Ivorian soldiers whose arrest triggered a bitter diplomatic row, Malian citizens praised their decision. After Mali's leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, pardoned all 49 Ivorian soldiers last Friday, whose arrest in July triggered a bitter diplomatic row, Malian citizens praised the decision. The soldiers have returned home on Saturday night and tensions are now subsiding between the two countries, Mali and Ivory Coast. Mali's leader had decided to pardon all the 49 Ivorian soldiers on Friday in order to de-escalate current tensions between Mali and Ivory Coast. On the 30th of December, 46 soldiers were sentenced to 20 years in prison, while 3 women among the original 49, who had already been freed in early September, received death sentences in absentia. They were convicted of an attack and conspiracy against the government of Mali and of seeking to undermine state security. Public prosecutor Laji Serra said in a statement at the time. The trial opened in the capital Bamako on the 29th of December and concluded the following day. The court proceedings came in the run-up to a January 1 deadline set by the leaders from the Economic Community of West African States for Mali to release the soldiers or face sanction.
We were in a diplomatic turmoil for a long time, so if President Assimi Goïta was able to pardon these 49 soldiers, I think it is a relief for the international community, for the sub-regional community, and for all of the Malian people and the Ivorian people. Given that Mali and Côte d'Ivoire are from the same land, we have practically the same culture, but when this kind of thing happens, for me, it should be settled amicably, but not in a way that can lead to more misunderstandings between these two countries.
Mali's leaders had branded the troops who were detained after arriving at Bamako airport on the 10th of July as mercenaries. Ivory Coast and the United Nations say the soldiers were flown in to provide routine backup security for the German contingent of the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali. A psychologist and defender of women's rights answering the questions of Winifred Manu Asamoah brought to air the practice of female genital mutilation in Nigeria. More information in the following interview.
Bodily integrity, which is inviolability of human body, is considered a women's right. Yet, female genital mutilation remains widespread in Nigeria. According to statistics published on the UNICEF website, the practice exists. State prevalence ranges from 62% in Imo to less than 1% in Adamawa and Gombe. The prevalence of female genital mutilation is the highest in the southeast, that is 35%, and the southwest 30%, and lowest in the northeast 6%. How do you explain that the communities view the practice as a good tradition?
Unfortunately, the issues around this are rooted in myth and in tradition. All around the world now, the rights of women are under discussion. And unfortunately, there has been a sort of reactionary tendency. For instance, the rolling back of rights towards abortion and family planning. Mutilating the human body, no matter whatever you say, whatever you think is the reason for it, the foundation for it, can never be right, because every part of the body has its own function. Whether we know it now or we will know it later as science advances, we just need to know that every part of the body has the function. Things off is not beneficial to anybody. But I say that the issue of genital mutilation, which is a traditional practice, is rooted in mythology. Because to say that one particular part of the body generates what they call a promiscuity, how do you prove that? It's not scientifically sound to say that. I think because of that, we have to say that it's a myth. It's just a myth. People just believe it. But actually, there's no foundation for that belief.
Okay, Doc. Many view women rights activists as agents trying to impose Western idea on the African continent. How do you react to that?
Yes, it's a somewhat pervasive belief. But I think that, like many views on the rights of women, it's founded in ignorance. If we look at the history of Africa, African women have been prominent. They have been active. In fact, the relegation of women to subsidiary role in our society is a function of colonialism. It's part of the heritage of colonialism. We all know that if we look at the history, as Professor Bolanle Awe rightly said, history shows that African women were equal partners with the men in the development of society before colonialism, before the Western way of looking at women came to be. So for someone to think that being